Hello, everyone. I am Paula Williams. I'm the president of the board of the ACLU of Tennessee, and I am so happy to welcome you here to our annual meeting. And we're going to have a very interesting discussion, an interesting evening. And my job is simply to tell you how glad we are to have you here, and also to let you know that we appreciate you. We appreciate the staff of the ACLU of Tennessee, as well as the board members who are serving with us. So I want to introduce Hedy Weinberg, who is the executive director of the ACLU of Tennessee. As always, a wonderful person to work with and to lead this organization. So I'll turn it over to you, Hedy.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Good to see you. Hopefully one day we'll be in the same space and not doing this virtual thing.
Once again, yes.
Hi, everyone. I am just delighted you've joined us tonight as we explore the impact of money bail on Tennesseans and really shine a light on what is a two-tier system of justice, where people with limited incomes who don't have the resources to post bond bail remain in jail pre-trial. And those with access to money can post bail and are released pending their trial. The system is disproportionately harming people of color, and the collateral consequences are enormous. So before we begin tonight's program, I just want to thank you all for standing with us on the front lines, especially during these past 18 months. Across Tennessee, really across the country, the pandemic continues to exacerbate racial and economic inequalities, and the dangerous new laws and policies that are being adopted in this state are oppressing vulnerable people, vulnerable communities who are already marginalized and disenfranchised by white supremacy and the inequities. The attacks are relentless, and I think you know that ACLU is on the ground. We're in the courtroom, we're in the Capitol, we're in communities statewide, and we are challenging voter suppression tactics that frankly are at an all-time high, especially the disenfranchisement of Black and Brown people and individuals with felony convictions. We're challenging the escalating attacks on transgender individuals, those students who are in public schools who are now no longer able to participate on sports teams or use the school bathrooms that conform with their gender identity. And we're challenging the attempts to ban classroom conversation on race, on racism, the history of racism. We're challenging the dangerous laws that are taking away the right of Tennesseans to obtain safe and legal abortions. And I could go on, and I know you know that list is very long. What I do want you to know is that it's your partnership that drives our tireless pursuit of justice and equity, as does the work we do in partnership with grassroots organizations and in the vibrant and very inclusive coalitions in which we are members. We are committed and remain committed to centering the voices of people impacted by abusive, discriminatory practices and policies. And that's really what tonight's program is all about. We're going to share our neighbor stories about predatory money bail systems that prey on vulnerable Tennesseans and that embolden bond sharks and prison profiteers. And then we're going to explore the ways we can all work together in our state across communities toward bold state money bail reform. Now, tonight's program, as you know, is titled Blood in the Water, Stories from Tennessee's Broken Bail System. And you'll come to understand the title as you hear the voices of individuals impacted by the money bail system. I'm especially excited and honored to introduce our awesome panelists tonight. Claire Gardner is the ACLU Senior Communication Engagement Strategist. And in that position, she connects people from all over the state to ensure their collaboration and partnership with our work. And that includes creating a range of communication and advocacy campaigns. Claire is a graduate of Middle Tennessee State University School of Social Work and in fact, first joined the ACLU team as a communications intern in the fall of 2012. Claire directed ACLU-TN's In Our Backyard campaign, which was funded by the Vera Institute, and she designed the campaign, conducted the interviews with the people you will meet tonight, and she produced the video. Brandon Buskey is the director of National's ACLU Criminal Law Reform Project. CLRP seeks to end policies that fuel mass incarceration and over-criminalization by focusing primarily on the front end of criminal enforcement systems, such as pretrial practices, policing, and prosecutorial discretion. Brandon has been with the ACLU since 2012, and he previously worked for the Equal Justice Initiative and the Civil Rights Bureau of the New York State Attorney General's Office. Need to know, we are an affiliate of the National ACLU. Brandon is based out of the National ACLU, but he is a valued advisor to us as we move forward on both our bail reform and our reimagining policing initiatives. Brandon will discuss how money bail is a key driver of mass incarceration and share what types of reform are taking place in other states, as well as recommendations for what we might do in Tennessee. Now we're going to, just to unfold the program, Claire will begin, and then Brandon will follow, and then we'll conclude with a brief Q&A. So a reminder, please put any questions you have in the Q&A area, not in the chat area. The chat area is open for engagement, for conversation, any perspectives, opinions you have, but questions, please put in the Q&A. And now it's my honor to ask Claire to enter the platform and join us and share her story.
Thank you so much, Hedy, and thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. I'm very excited and very, very proud to share our In Our Backyards project with you and highlight just a few of the voices that we met while traveling across the state to learn how money bail has impacted them, people who live in rural counties and their neighbors. While bail is a driver of mass incarceration statewide, its impact on rural communities is in many cases more severe than it is in Tennessee's city centers. Since 2000, the pretrial incarceration rate has increased 163% in the state's 53 rural counties, and that's compared to an increase of only 2% in the state's urban counties. And it makes sense that larger, more densely populated counties would logically have more people in their jails. But in recent years, small cities and rural counties in Tennessee have been those with the highest rates of incarceration per capita. Through a grant provided by the Vera Institute of Justice, myself and other ACLU Tennessee staff were able to travel to 3 rural communities across the state: McMinn County in East Tennessee, Warren County in Middle Tennessee, and Obion County in West Tennessee, to meet with and learn from people who had seen firsthand how this unfair practice hurt them and others in their towns. These folks, from people and family members of those who had been incarcerated and unable to make bail, to public defenders, general sessions court judges, recovery experts, court advocates, and others, all bravely agreed to share their stories and lend their expertise and experience to better help people across the state of Tennessee understand the dangerous, ineffective, and predatory ways the bail system hurts them. I'd like to share just a few of the stories that we heard during our project tonight. When we originally met Debbie, a Warren County commissioner, we asked if she would share her experience as an elected official in a small, close-knit community grappling with an overcrowded jail. We were surprised then when she asked if she could instead not speak just as a commissioner, but share what she knew would be a much more commonly held perspective. One of a mother, one who recalls how her teenage son's brush with the law came close to wrecking his future, simply because her family, which was struggling with medical debt, couldn't afford his bond. It is Debbie's words that provided us with the title of our event tonight. Recalling meeting with bail bondsmen in the middle of the night decades prior, she remembered them as sharks who sensed her family's desperate need to help their son was nothing more than blood in the water.
don't have any money, you're screwed.
For so long in the criminal justice system, what we have done is locked up the people we're mad at.
I don't know how they live, frankly. They don't have any money.
These are our family members who are in that jail. I've lived in this house, in this community, for it'll be 32 years this fall. I had cancer 21 years ago. You know, once cancer comes back, it spreads rapidly. And so they had to actually take my vocal cords out. We used all of our savings. We took our 401ks out to pay medical bills and just to live. We had nothing. We didn't know if we were gonna lose our home. This community, groups of people, the soccer team my daughter was on, they brought food, but they went to all the utilities in town. From our cable, gas, electric, water, paid everything for 4 months. I mean, everything we needed was thought of and taken care of. I wanted to say all that so you understand the financial situation we were in. It was the 4th of July. Sean's out with his friends. Hear the phone ring as I'm walking through with a laundry basket. I can still picture this. I picked up the phone and Sean said, "Hey Mom, what are you doing?" I said, "Laundry, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm in jail." He and his other stupid friends thought it would be funny to steal 4 plastic chairs that were for sale in front of the Dollar General store. Those chairs cost $5 each, $20. Well, they don't get very far down the road and police pull them over. And Dollar General press charges. And I'll tell you, seeing my son in shackles and chains, I wouldn't wish that on any mother, to see their son in shackles and chains. I broke down and cried. It was one of the hardest things I've ever endured. And on top of that, we had no idea how we would get him out of jail, what it would take. We had no money. The other kids who were arrested that night, their parents were laughing. They thought it was funny. They had the money. Those other 3 boys didn't have a worry in the world. They knew they were going home. They were laughing, joking. Their parents were, bailing them out. We were scared to death that our son was going to be in jail for months on end. I think it took 6 months before the hearing. I know it was a long time. And before he got to go before the judge and plead. So he would have missed all of his classes if he was sitting in jail. That would have affected the financial aid that he got because he would have failed the classes or dropped. He also had a job delivering ice. It's the busy season is summer, 4th of July. He would have lost that job. But my husband met with a bail bondsman who their bail was set at, I guess, $5,000 because we needed $500. The one saving grace, our mortgage payment was close to $500 and we had not yet paid it. And for whatever reason, I hadn't gone to the bank to pay it. So I had almost $500. Thank God. I gave my husband the mortgage money. I said, "You can give him this because that's all we have." It would have been game over if we didn't have the money to bail him out that night because he would have been in jail at least till his hearing. Otherwise, my son would probably be in and out of jail the rest of his life because I feel like once somebody sits in there 6 months, they lose all hope. And it's all for money. This is why they can't get out. Sean did join the Navy at 23 years old. He has been in 15 years. He has a beautiful family, 3 daughters and a son, a beautiful wife. He's, finally on the right path. Luckily, I only had that experience. I think there's a mindset that they got what they deserved. And until it happens to their child, they don't realize that could be just as easily be them. People need to be educated about what's really behind a lot of this. And it's a money-making process for bail bondsmen. It's almost like they're sharks You smell the blood in the water. They smell the need that people don't have $5,000 sitting around, but I'll loan it to them for a fee of $500, which is a lot of money, even now. So I see the bail bondsman as a necessary evil, I guess. It's the only way you can get your kid out of jail. If you have money, you don't have to worry in our criminal justice system. But a lot of people do not have money. They don't have an extra 500 to 10,000 or whatever the bail may be. They don't have it, and they can't get it. And their loved one ends up in jail. And they're not even thrown in jail so much for what they did. They could be bonded out if they have the money. So it's almost like we're sending people to jail because they don't have money. Not almost. It is. We are sending people to jail. We're keeping people in jail because they don't have money.
As Debbie described her fear of her son sitting in jail for months on end, losing all hope, and ultimately ending up going back in and out of jail for the rest of his life, we know that that's actually a realistic fear because pretrial detention, even for short periods, has been shown to have a long-lasting impact, not only on individuals' employment, financial, and family stability, but it also increases the risk of rearrest and makes it far more likely that individuals will be found guilty or pressured into pleading guilty simply to secure their own freedom from detention. Defendants held on bail are also receive more severe sentences, are offered less attractive plea bargains, and are more likely to reoffend. Our next storyteller comes from Obion County in West Tennessee. Bill, a local assistant public defender, describes watching his clients' family members empty bank accounts to make bail and get their loved ones out of jail. And he also shared his perspective of a rural community that is pursuing alternatives to detention, including implementing drug court diversion programs and utilizing RORs, or release on recognizance, to combat the county jail's overpopulation crisis.
I'm an assistant district public defender, and I represent people who are charged with crimes but cannot afford to pay a lawyer. A lot of what I call my people do not have a checking account. They don't have a savings account. They don't have any money. And I mean, I don't know how they get by with that amount of money. A lot of them dropped out of school when they were 8th, 9th, 10th grade. And just some of them, I hate to say it, but would not have ever been arrested if they had been someone who is a long-term, long-standing member of the community. Men that wear ties don't usually get pulled over, you know, that sort of thing. We see a lot of meth, but 90% of what we do involves marijuana, and that's the people that are getting charged. I mean, there's a difference between, frankly, between poor people and people that have money, and it's that the disparity is there, you know, here, just like any place. Let's say that I'm charged with an offense, and let's say that it is a drug offense, and let's say I've got a $10,000 bond. Let's say Mama has $2,000. Mama can either hire a lawyer for me, maybe not, for $2,000, or they can make bail. They go and they rustle up money, and in certain communities, people will put money in a pot and for a bond, and you know, I see mothers, I see grandmothers who will empty out bank accounts, and I'm talking about $50, $60, $70, $100,000 in bail money, in lawyer money. It just 401ks. They'll go empty 401ks, and next thing I know, mother and grandmother's destitute and penniless. For non-violent offenses, the jails are being overrun, and they don't have the run. There's priority given. People aren't making a lot of bonds here anymore. I mean, they're They're just not. I see them come across my desk all the time that are ORs, released to mama, of the way bonds are being done now here in this county. And from what I understand, it's the trend to go with lower bonds and a lot of OR bonds, things that do not involve money. In other words, they sign a piece of paper promising to be there, and then they show up. I tell my people to dress up when they come to court. Some can, some can't. Are you treated better in United States courts if you present a good appearance? Absolutely. It's just how it is. When you're the prosecutor, you're always expected to win, and you're the public defender, nobody expects you to win, and your client doesn't even expect you to win. I try to disabuse them of that notion, and really, it shouldn't matter whether you have money for retained counsel or not. I mean, it shouldn't.
Bill's perspective underscores a theme that each one of our storytellers shared with us. For people who live in poverty and who struggle with issues that make them more vulnerable to incarceration, including addiction, to homelessness, to mental health needs, money bail compounds already insurmountable obstacles. Adults who are living in poverty are 3 times more likely to be arrested than those who aren't, and most people who are incarcerated because they're unable to make bail come from the poorest third of our society. So once these vulnerable people are in the system, they're far less likely to be able to afford to buy their freedom back and get out. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, the median bail amount in the country is $10,000, and the median annual income for a person in jail is a little over $15,000. That means that the median bail amount equates to roughly 8 months of their annual income, which makes it very unrealistic to expect that these people could afford to make their bail without turning to a predatory bail bondsman instead. This reality is echoed by our final storyteller this evening from McMinn County in East Tennessee. Stephen, a former teacher of the year at the local middle school, discusses both his own experience with the bail system and his observation of how the criminalization of poverty traps his town's growing communities of people who are battling addiction and homelessness in an endless cycle of incarceration.
The jails, our jails are being overrun.
I want to get out. I want to get back to my family. I want to get back to my children. I just want to get help.
They sit in jail and I think fall through the cracks.
30 years ago, that jail downtown was big enough, and now we need that jail over here. I moved to Athens from Knoxville in 1989 and taught 7th and 8th grade English and reading at Athens Junior High for 15, 16 years. You know, when I left teaching, what I didn't understand is how much I would miss the kids. And when I left, it was just like a gigantic hole in my life. I didn't know how to replace it. And the alcoholism just got worse and worse. I was arrested 3 times for driving under the influence. The bail bonding system, if you have the money, then you can get out real quickly. But if you can't pay a bond, then you're stuck in jail. I had money at that time, so it wasn't hard for me, but it really opened my eyes about how incarceration works. It is set up to keep the rich rich and to keep the poor poor. There are all kinds of rules. They reinforce those cycles. Of the 10 counties in the United States that have the highest rate of opioid addiction, 3 of those counties are in Tennessee. What you're seeing in Athens right now is a lot of the pain clinics have closed. Pills are harder to get. They cost more. Then you have the unintended consequence of heroin and fentanyl. You know, people get out of jail, they're addicts. We let people out and there are no services. It's when it comes to mass incarceration and to addiction, people say that can't happen to me. Athens has a very high rate of poverty. It's not a poor town, but you got a lot of poor people in it. Per capita, the homeless rate here is just as much as it is in Chattanooga or Knoxville. What has started happening is if you open up the paper and look at the list of people arrested, you're going to see a lot of criminal trespassing. But really all it means is that you are banned from that establishment and you return to it. People are incarcerated for criminal trespassing. Obviously homeless people, they don't have the money, so they're stuck. Society has basically criminalized addiction. It's criminalized poverty to some degree. It's criminalized mental illness. When a society sets people like that up, where it doesn't offer a hand up, only a cycle of incarceration and homelessness, then we're throwing lives away. Lives have had a lot of value. My track coach used to say you learn a lot more by losing than winning. And I've learned more from being an addict in recovery than I learned from getting a master's degree. I've learned more from that than from anything else in my life. You know, I know from doing free lunches and being in 12-step meetings that a lot of people's lives who are being discarded, who face an uphill battle that most of them are not going to make, they have enormous value, every one of them.
The stories that Stephen, Debbie, Bill, and the rest of the people that we spoke to for this project, and the ones that they so courageously agreed to share, are illuminating, but they're also heartbreaking, infuriating, and unfortunately not at all uncommon in the state. We are grateful to each of them for sharing their voices so that we can all better understand the harm money bail inflicts on rural Tennessee communities. It's critical that lawmakers heed the words of their constituents and their neighbors about our state's desperate need for bail reform, and that local communities pursue alternatives to wealth-based pretrial justice system. All of the storytellers' videos that you've seen tonight and more, a written report that includes narratives delving deeper into their experiences and policy recommendations, can be found on our website at this link. There you can also explore data about bail in Tennessee, share your own experiences with the money bail system in your county, and learn more about bail reform efforts happening here and across the country. With that, I just want to thank all of you for giving me a few moments of your time. And now I would like to go ahead and kick it back over to Brandon Buskey, the director of the ACLU Criminal Law Reform Project.
Hey, everyone. And thank you, Claire, for that amazing, amazing work, and then capturing those really just heartfelt and earnest and true stories. Thanks to Hedy for inviting me here. It's a real privilege to be here with you all and talking about this issue, which is very close to my heart. And before I begin, I just want to reflect a little bit on the video and why this matters, because I think when you heard from Debbie and Stephen about why this matters, one thing I would underline from both of their presentations is, when Debbie says, you don't tend to care until it's your children. And Stephen says, you don't think it can happen to you until it happens to you, right? This is part of why I think this has to matter to everyone, is that it can strike very close to home when you least expect it. And I think that's a great reason for why you're all here today and the look ahead. So what I'd like to do in my time here is really demonstrate, why the work in Tennessee that Claire has outlined here is so critical to the national movement on cash bail and unjust pretrial detention, and to also identify some lessons from the national movement that I think could be of use in your own effort here. And so first I want to talk a little bit about why fixing rural bail is necessary to ending mass incarceration. And I think the video does this as well, but I also want to outline the stakes and what's really on the line if we don't get this right. And then finally talk a little bit about how we got here and with some hope, how we can get ourselves out of here. So first, I often say we cannot talk about mass incarceration without talking about bail reform. Now, what do I mean by mass incarceration? You may know that over 2 million people in this country right now in jails and prisons. This is detention on an unprecedented scale, both in terms of historical norms and our current situation. In fact, the United States holds the distinction of being the world's #1 incarcerator, both in terms of the rate of people it detains and also the total size of our imprisoned population. In fact, the United States only has about 5% of the world's population, but nearly 25% of its prisons. And it's a system that is not colorblind, and it is one infected with systemic inequality. Black Americans, data out today from the Fencing Project, are imprisoned at a rate nearly 5 times that of white Americans. The stakes are not equal when it comes to mass incarceration. Now, here's how bail fits in. There are about 700,000 people in jails, often local jails. Some of them are serving a very short term from a minor offense, but the bulk, about 2/3, or around 450,000 people, are sitting in jails simply awaiting trial. And that means, we think about the 2 million people who are in jails and prisons overall, that more than 1 out of every 5 people in a jail or prison in our country is someone who is presumed innocent and hasn't been convicted of anything. In fact, our pretrial population alone would be the world's largest population of people incarcerated, ranking just behind Russia, but well ahead of countries like Thailand, Turkey, and Indonesia. But that's only really part of the story, because another part of the story is just the churn of our jail system. In fact, there are over 10 million admissions to jail in our country per year. That's literally unimaginable in terms of how many people cycle through our jails on a yearly basis. And again, just like the larger mass incarceration system, this system has extraordinary racial disparities. 43% of people held pre-trial are Black. Black and Latinx individuals are more likely to be detained on bail they can't afford, and to receive higher bail amounts compared to similar white defendants. But it's definitely worth mentioning, if you watch that video, the faces of those who are victimized are not simply those of color, and this system really can strike at any moment anyone because of their economic circumstances. And with all of that, I think we reach the last point here, which is that we can't talk about bail and fixing our bail system without talking about rural America. Vera, who worked very closely with ACLU Tennessee on this report, has found that while we tend to focus on the large urban areas, just like in Tennessee, across the nation, small and rural jails are actually driving the increase in our jail populations, especially when it comes to pretrial detention. In fact, over the past 10 years, the incarceration rates pretrial for large urban areas has actually declined. So we're really talking about a problem that is concentrated in our rural areas. And I think that drives home how necessary it is to pay attention to them. And the stakes are dire. I don't want to belabor this too much, but I think the video and Claire's remarks do this perfectly. But you can just see that the toll that pretrial detention and the worry about how to make bail can have on personal health, perhaps losing your job, losing custody of your children, being separated from your family and loved ones who you might have to care for, who might care for you, and also losing your house. We had a story of someone who put up mortgage money in order to bail out her son. Now, when we think about rural jails and urban jails, the rural jails have the same problems of dangerous conditions and overcrowding, but they often have higher risks of prolonged detention due to court system delays. You saw Debbie said they waited 6 months to even go before a judge for a plea bargain. We litigated a case in Mississippi, a neighbor to the south for Tennessee, and what was shocking there was our clients in that case had been held on bail amounts for drug offenses and had been held in jail for a year without ever seeing a judge, without ever actually being charged with a crime, at least not by indictment. And that was because in that jurisdiction, which was very rural, Scott County, Mississippi, they only had court 3 or 4 times per year. So if you simply got arrested during the wrong time of year, you could be waiting 4 or 8 or an entire year before you could ever get before a judge. And that problem is especially acute in rural areas. And so I think it's not surprising at all that people who are held in pretrial detention are far more likely to plead guilty. Claire gave a little bit of this effect in her presentation, but just to put a fine point on this, just being detained for 2 to 3 days can make you 13 to 20% more likely to be convicted, often by simply pleading guilty and then receiving a harsher sentence. And I want to emphasize that this is not just correlation, right? This is a causal relationship. Pretrial detention causes wrongful convictions, in part because people are they're pleading guilty in cases that would otherwise be dismissed by similar people who had the fortune to afford their bail, get out and fight their case. So just how did we get here? It's I think in many ways perplexing, but I think also when you dive in, it's relatively straightforward. First, I think we have to really address the addiction that this country has to cash bail. There's a fallacy that is often said by people in the bail bond industry that we need cash bail because in order for a person to follow the rules that the court set, they have to have skin in the game. And so based on that, you often have courts, jurisdictions that use what we call bail schedules, which basically like a menu of bail amounts set by charge. So if you're charged with a lesser offense, you might have a $500 bail. A higher offense, you might have a higher bail, but it's always cash bail, always requires a payment up front. And we've done this all over the country without any evidence that cash bail increases how likely you are to return to court or reduces your risk of arrest if you're released. I want to repeat that. There's no evidence that cash bail works despite how prevalent it has become across the nation. Now, I think very closely tied to the addiction to cash bail, as this presentation made clear, is also the profit motive, and in particular, the bail bond industry. I think it was talked about in the film a little bit, but just to make clear, what often happens with a bail bondsman or bail bonds person is, you have to pay a premium of 10% of the total amount of bail. But it doesn't stop there, because you also have to put up collateral for the full bail amount. That's often your home, your car, anything that can satisfy the full amount and can be forfeited by the bond agent if somebody doesn't come back to court. In the agreement that the bond agents often strike with individuals or their family, the person being supervised has to agree to enormously intrusive conditions, like searches of their home and their own body without a warrant, to drug testing, to continuous GPS monitoring. And again, it doesn't even stop there, because the bond agent retains the authority to return you to prison even if you don't miss a payment and even if you don't miss a court date. In fact, they can return you to prison even if they suspect that the value of your home, the value of the collateral that you have put up for the bond has dropped. Once they see you as a financial risk, they can simply take you back to jail without any cause whatsoever. And again, much like cash bail, there is no evidence that bail bonds people are more effective at returning people to jail and keeping them from rearrest than other means like supportive services, or as mentioned in the film, just having somebody sign an agreement they're going to come back to court when their court date is due. Now, while there's no evidence that bail bond agents are effective, there's ample evidence of their incredible harms. You heard some of those harms in the film just now, but there's also the problem of bounty hunters. We had a case in Montana where bounty hunters hired by a bail bond agent conducted a 6-person armed SWAT raid of one of our clients in the dead of night. And despite knowing that his wife was also in the house along with their 4-year-old daughter. And this was all because our client, Eugene Mitchell, had inadvertently missed a court date on a traffic offense. Now, beyond just the physical danger that a bail bond agent can put you in, it also traps your family in a cycle of debt. Make no mistake, the bail bond industry is a billion-dollar industry, and it is largely built on the backs of poor families and families of color. So that's how we got here, by and large. Now, how do we get out of here? And what I often say is that the key to this is really beginning to build a culture of release, and to build a culture of release that is free from the addiction of money bail. The first step in this is actually in many cases quite simple. You simply have to follow the law. If you've read the report they put together by the ACLU Tennessee, your state's actually in very good company in that many states like Tennessee have relatively good law on the books about bail. It's just that judges fail or refuse to follow that good law. So in Tennessee, things like cash must be reserved as a last resort. And the law says that the judges should only impose the least restrictive conditions necessary in a particular case. That is almost never what happens. And so just simply following the law on the books could take you a long way toward building this culture of release. The second step is following evidence-based practices. I talked a lot about what doesn't work, cash bond, bail bond agents, but we now know pretty well what does work. Things as simple as court date reminders, making sure that people understand the consequences of not coming back to court, and then the day before, sending them a text message and saying, remember, you got to get yourself to court on time the next day. And that dramatically increases court appearance rates well above cash bail. And also supportive services. You know, we heard about Stephen's problems and challenges with addiction. You know, providing those kinds of services at the front end for people who are really struggling can do a tremendous amount to stabilize them, offering them diversion so that they don't have to go through the criminal system in order to return back to their lives, are all far more effective than putting them in jail or making them obtain a bail bond agent to buy their freedom. And finally, and I hope this goes without saying, we have to eliminate the profit motive from our bail system. There's simply no place for bail bond agents in this system. They will simply corrupt any effort at reform. And so even on top of that, even when we're thinking about getting rid of the bail bond agents, we also have to make sure that we're getting rid of payments for other kinds of conditions of release, like drug testing and GPS monitoring, which we should be using very rarely, if at all, but we certainly then should not be putting the bill on individuals going through the system. So just to finish here, I think in many ways that the path to reform is clear, but as I think these videos demonstrate, it is also extraordinarily difficult. And so I want to commend you all for attending this event and showing your commitment to this issue, and also the ACLU of Tennessee for really trying to push the state on the right path toward extraordinarily necessary reform. So thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Claire. I mean, the voices that you captured, the stories you told of the folks in McMinn and Warren and Obion County, just so powerful. And really, it's hard to understand how those voices can't impact change. And I think listening to Brandon talk about what change can look like and how you have to begin at the start is just a call to us to keep the drumbeat going. It's time for questions now, and there are some that are in the chat, in the Q&A. There's one question, Brandon, that I think you, just to springboard off what you mentioned about how Tennessee has a great law. You know, we have a law, I'll call it great, but we have law that says ROR, release on recognizance, is the first step, and that cash bail is the last. So how and why can judges just violate that? Is there anything we can do about it? Why is it happening all over the country?
It's a perplexing issue, and one that we deal with a lot. And I would say the first thing is there's often no accountability for the judges who don't follow the law. And that happens for a lot of reasons. It happens in part because in many places you have struggling public defender systems where the person who is accused of a crime and is put in jail does not have a lawyer on their side who is pressing the judge, trying to appeal the court's ruling. And then, you know, we have a narrative in this country around being tough on crime, and so the things that judges do, you know, in these contexts, often don't come back to them when it comes time for them to be either reappointed or reelected. And so I think that's a great opportunity for community members to really pay attention to elections for judges. I know you all are working a lot on transparency for prosecutors, but put a judge in that mix as well. And if you find out that the judges are not following the law in your jurisdiction, that should become an issue in the next election, because there are laws on the books that they should be held accountable for.
And that really speaks to what we're trying to do more of, which is not about endorsing candidates, but really getting people to know where their judges, where their DAs stand on these kinds of questions. Thank you. Some people are asking questions about the rural counties and what that's like to work in, and really how do you decide what a rural county is versus suburban? We kind of know what urban is. But Claire, you know, our rural engagement program, which you have expanded, is, you know, I find it so important to how we do our work. And can you talk a little bit about what that was like going in as an ACLU, or what people's, you know, what kind of reaction and reception you got from people as you went in there to talk about an issue that's pretty sensitive?
Absolutely. I'll admit that when I first drove into Athens and McMinnville and Union City, I was a little bit nervous about how we would be received with this project, but I learned very quickly that one, you know, good old-fashioned Southern hospitality is alive and well, and that we were received with open arms. And two, that it really didn't matter what side of the aisle you came on, left aisle, right aisle, progressive, conservative, or anything like that, that in these communities, this is an issue that impacts everyone, and that it was something that everybody felt that they were touched by and wanted to solve. And so we found that people were really, really responsive to the fact that we were there, that we recognized that there was a crisis happening in their communities. We were not introducing the concept to anyone. We were not saying, did you know that bail is a predatory system that hurts people who have low incomes? They were saying, oh, we've known for a while, and here's what we're trying to do to fix this system.
Thank you. Brandon, Cassandra says that she lives in Putnam County, and that last year, we saw this happening all over the state and country, really, that with the pandemic, the local sheriff's office deliberately reduced the population, about half, she says, through a decision not to hold non-violent offenders or suspects who were pre-trial. And as she puts it, society did not collapse, right? But then the policy ended and the population has shot back up. So now there are actually conversation in Putnam County to build a new jail to take care of the growing population in the jails. Are you aware, she says, of counties in Tennessee, but I would say all over the country, since we saw this practice during the pandemic. Have you found counties in this country that have actually understood that, wow, you can reduce the pretrial population and not, you know, create this fear about increase crime and worry about safety, public safety?
I would say there have been a couple come to mind, like out in, I guess it's not less rural, but Washington's had a couple of counties more scattered. Unfortunately, the broader trend is, I think, more like what she's witnessing, which is that where we are now seeing, after a large reduction in jail population, the population begin to creep back up as jails now begin to refill. We've seen that. And as you know, we brought a case against the Shelby County jail system. They also depopulated a little bit at the beginning, and over the course of our litigation, the jail population began to take up again, right? And that's much more like the trend that we're seeing. I would say if there is hope, that there's been a more sustainable reduction in prison levels, where people who've actually been convicted of crime were released and have been allowed to serve out the rest of their sentence at home, and those folks generally have not been returned. And yet we're also not seeing the sky fall, and then rates of crime have not increased as a result of that.
Thank you. And Claire, someone asks, did you interview anyone who said something about bail that surprised you?
Yeah, I think that there were a number of things that I was surprised by interviewing folks for this project. I think one, I really thought I was gonna, we interviewed all different types of people with all different types of perspectives and experiences. People who had been arraigned, people who were behind the bench, lawyers, court advocates, social workers. And I really thought that one person was going to say bail is a reasonable system, or here's how it could work. And we did not find that. Nobody made any argument that it worked for their community or worked at all. It mostly seemed that they were trying to figure out how to work around it, or making the argument that it didn't need to exist in their community at all. And even though that was true across the board, regardless of what someone's perspective was, it was also really surprising and kind of heartbreaking to realize that all of the people who had been in the criminal justice system and had been incarcerated had been so desperate to return to their lives and to return to their families and to not lose their jobs, that even though they didn't think that bail made sense and they were very angry, even thinking about the concept and the injustice of it, they would still have accepted whatever amount that they could afford to be able to return home.
Mm-hmm. And that speaks to what Brandon said about people pleading out just so that they can get home and return to some normalcy. This is a question for either or both of you. I think it really shows the intersectionality of all these issues. It's from Erin, and she says, it can get so complicated when the very system that is preying on the community is the only way for people to make a livelihood in that community. Are there any ideas as to how to address the reliance that rural communities may have on the criminal justice system for jobs? I will say, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, actually, go ahead. I just kind of hear your thoughts first.
Well, we hear about this all the time, when over the years, and when we've talked about, be it prisons or jails, and trying to reduce the size, or when they're building new jails, keep them smaller, it always comes to people will lose their jobs. It's kind of what the bail bond industry is doing today about we'll be out of jobs. And I think the question becomes, how do you ensure that there is really what I think of as wraparound services? Jailing someone with substance abuse, as Stephen talked about, right, doesn't solve the problem. So are there ways to retrain people, to open up certain kinds of clinics and programs, social services, where not only are you providing services that are necessary that would support people, but you could also retrain people in a way that they're making livelihoods that give them some sense of contributing? It's a hard question. But it does speak to the reality of what is happening in a lot of rural communities around the absence of job opportunities.
Absolutely. And part of why it's hard is, if you're somebody who is losing their job because they're closing down a prison or a jail, or because they're getting away from cash bond, and so can't continue to work as a bail bond agent, you likely don't see yourself as converting over into something else like supportive services, although there will be more jobs there. And so I think at some point it comes down to a matter of principle that there are just some industries that we can't allow to be supported, and the community, the governments have to sort of then band together to make sure that there are still opportunities available for those that are left behind when we make those decisions. And then that's just never an easy process to pull through.
Okay, we have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. Eric asks, and what are the other ways folks can be reminded that they have to be in court? And he asks, if these charged individuals are primarily poor and in rural areas, would they be able to receive texts or email reminders about court appearances? Would they have cell phones or computers to receive these notices? But maybe you could also talk a little bit about how that system works.
Yeah, and I think the most directly to the question, the answer is yes. I'm always shocked at how many people have cell phone access, and it's very basic. There are companies out there like Upturn is one that we interact with a lot, and they work with the court system to set up the reminder program with the courts, and you provide just a number at which you can be reached, and you get a text message at kind of these intervals before the court date. But even in New York City, for folks who don't have access to cell phone coverage, they just left people with, they did a study about this, I think around 5 years ago, showing that just kind of giving people a card that very clearly says what their hearing is about, when their hearing is coming up, and then sending another reminder via mail, right? Again, just another reminder, just kind of a ping that person, trying to find childcare, make sure they can get out of work. All these things are really effective and really easy to administer in terms of keeping folks aware of their court dates and reminding them.
Yeah, I discussed that particular alternative with many of the people that I interviewed, and I was excited that everyone I spoke to was really excited about something like that, because it seemed so common sense and relatively easy to initiate. I thought it was interesting because I know at the Tennessee State Legislature, where when we start talking about what reforms might or alternatives might be passed, we don't talk so much about that one. We talk more about things like risk assessment tools. And that was something that pretty much everybody that I talked to was really, really wary of and really leery about, and didn't think that it was going to work for their community or their clients. And so I thought something like a text reminder or call or even mail reminder seemed like a really common sense, simple solution.
Mm-hmm. No, that's almost a good way to end. We do have to close down. I want people to know that we have all these questions. We're going to try to respond to as many as we can, and we'll share them with those of you who are in attendance and to folks who registered. Before we end the night, one, I want to thank obviously Claire and Brandon for just really setting out what is going on in our state and ensuring that we hear and center people's voices to understand the enormous impact the money bail system, the predatory system has on folks when they have to find themselves going to bail bonds companies. And also especially thank Lindsay Key, our Director of Strategic Communication, and Brenda Staffen, our Communications Associate, for all the behind the scenes work to make this happen. Most important though, know that the state of Tennessee is considering money bail reform. They held a summer study committee, a joint summer study committee of the House and the state Senate. They debated a number of issues. It leaned pretty much, I thought, a little bit anti-reform, but the most important thing is the conversation is going. We anticipate that there are some bills that were filed last year. It's a 2-year session, so we're going in 2022 into the second year. Those bills are still on the table, and we imagine there might be a couple more bills introduced. It is important that you contact your legislators. If you have never met them, get to know them before asking for something, but get to know them and then know they need to hear where you stand on every position, but certainly we're talking about money bail reform. And they need to understand that money bail needs to be ended in our state. It is not creating safe communities. It is marginalizing and disenfranchising people. And it's most importantly, not creating a community where people get to live their lives and be productive citizens, and instead find themselves in pretrial detention, unable to get out because they don't have the money in their pocketbook, and where folks with wealth are able to leave the jail upon arrest, waiting at home, holding on to their jobs, staying in touch with their family prior to the trial. So I urge you to contact your legislators. The Tennessee General Assembly has a great website. Just need to put in your zip code and you can find out who your legislators are. Want to thank you for being here. You know, our work is critical. You are a critical part to that work. And we have ambitious plans to really launch exciting campaigns that will marry empathetic storytelling that you heard tonight that Claire so brilliantly put together because of the people's willingness to share their stories with her, but marry that storytelling with data analysis. And we hope to do that with our ability to hire a data analyst, and you know that takes funds. So I hope that when you move toward the end of the year and toward the holiday season, you will think of the ACLU and consider a contribution. National ACLU is doing amazing work. ACLU-TN is in close partnership. We are one organization that is committed to ensuring that we eliminate money bail. And so we need you to be part of that. For now, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your friendship and enjoy the fall. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.